these Twitter spaces all the time. A big thank you to my team members, Joseph, Fuad, and all the Salom and all the other team members as well. I want to thank you, our speakers, who have made time with us. We want to start the space tonight. And what we're going to be doing is that we'll try as much as we can to cover the micro-physicals, which is revenue and expenditure, monetary policy. We'll look at agriculture. We'll look at social spending. We'll look at the extractives and energy. And we would also look at other sectors as we move along. I mean, the real estate and all that. So you are in for a date tonight. You're in for a date tonight. And it's a town hall, different from what we've been doing all the time. So feel free. You can also tweet at us, which is at Norvan Reports. You know, if you have any question, just tweet at us, or you wait until when we open up the discussion, and then you can, you know, contribute to it as you have to. So we want to thank you for joining us tonight, and we're going to start the discussion, and we're going to pull it down from looking at the revenues side. So in the micro-physicals, we're looking at monetary policy, and we want to look at the revenue side. And to start the discussion for us tonight will be Dr. Alex Ampabi. He's a fiscal policy specialist, and he is going to speak to us and let us understand some of the issues, the concerns that are there, and what we should be expecting, you know, as far as, or we expect the government to do going into the next half of the year. Dr. Ampabi, if you can hear me, thank you very much for making time with us. If you can unmute yourself and then take it from us. I mean, revenue seems to become one of the biggest challenges for us as a country. And I think the EVAT and the rest have come so they could help us generate more revenue. We also do know that the IMF program that we have is more tilted onto the revenue side. And so because it's more tilted onto the revenue side, you see that, you know, there is more taxes, you know, showing up. If you can help us understand what are the concerns in that area and then moving forward, sir.
Right. Thanks very much, Norvan, and a very good evening to everyone that has joined us this evening. As you rightly said, there are a number of concerns and obviously opportunities that the government is trying to explore, or should I say exploit, probably is a better word. And of course, we are here because of our current situation. As you know, Ghana has a substantial debt of about almost 64 billion. That is the last time we checked. If nothing has been added, then you are heading towards about nothing has been added, and at least we are talking about $64 billion in debt. And what that means is that it could be a mixture of issues. One is revenue generation challenges, and the other one is more for, of course, an expenditure issue. Because achieving a fiscal balance takes two things into consideration: your revenue and then your expenditure. So in 2023 budget, that was a budget that is more of, I would like to call an IMF budget. Government identified a few revenue measures. The first one is the increasing of the VAT from a 12.5% to 15%. And government was aiming to have a not free revenue impact. There was also the removal of the benchmark values at our ports, which generated a whole lot of issue in the last few months leading up to 2023. And that was to have a 0.2% in revenue impact. Then there was the revision of the income tax. As people who are listening and are on a higher income will notice, your income tax has moved from a 30% upper band to a 35% upper band. What that means is that your incomes that are more than 50,000 Ghana cedis a month will be subject to a 35% instead of a 30% tax rate. And then, of course, you also have the extension of the National Fiscal Stabilization Levy to what you now recall growth and sustainability levy to a number of sectors, including sectors which are already having some stabilization clauses, which I'm sure Ben will talk about it later in the course of the program. And then you also have the e-levy to be moved from 1.5 to 1%, and then the e-VAT rollout, which resulted in a number of closing or raiding of a number of big and high known or high profile shops in the country. And then also a number of VAT exemptions have been removed. So all these taxes or tax policies I've mentioned, measures, were to lead to a net 1% in a revenue impact. What that means is that we have a tax to GDP of around 12 point something percent, around just under 13%. What that means is that in 2023, government was anticipating that all these measures I mentioned were going to give uh, a revenue impact of 1%, meaning that it was going to add up to about roughly, let's say, about 10 billion uh, Ghana city, or up to about 14%, to move us to 14% on a tax to GDP. In terms of the revenue impact, if I have to move a bit backwards on what the IMF will give us, because obviously I'm sure somebody who is on would like to know, why did we sign up for the IMF and what are the revenue implications? So in talking about revenue implications for uh, if I would just concentrate on 2023, the IMF is actually to give us uh, quite a reasonable cash relief, which I'm talking about here, relief in service. So I would classify that more as a revenue. We did the domestic debt exchange number one, which was to give us 50 billion, or will give us 50 billion Ghana cedi in 2023. In other words, the monies that government will have spent in servicing our debt, which have been moved backwards, we are saving about 50 billion Ghana cedis on this. And as you know, there are conversations around cocoa bills and the dollar bonds. These two are also to give Ghana 15 billion cedis. If you put them together, 2023 alone, by going to IMF and by restructuring our debt, Ghana is going to be relieved of about 65 billion Ghana cedis internally. And then externally, the IMF, or all the debt that we should have paid for which we are not paying, I'm talking about the debt servicing cost. We are estimating to get about 10.5 billion in the life of the program. That gives us about 3.5 billion every year. So this 2023, government is likely to save or to be relieved of a debt servicing obligation of about $3.5 billion. In addition to that, the World Bank is also, as part of the program, as a sister institution to the IMF, is going to give us 1.6 billion. And like Norvan said, the whole IMF program is more geared towards revenue-based fiscal consolidation approach. And if you have the IMF document, probably I can help those who want to read later. It's available on the website. Paragraph 15 of the program, page number 8, or if you want to look at the MEFP submitted by Ghana government, MEFP number 11. And those who are familiar, I don't want to bore you with some technicalities. The MEFP is just the Memorandum of Economic and Financial Policies. That is the document that Ghana government submitted to the IMF. And again, I want to clarify this, that the IMF Ghana's program, we told IMF what we want, and we now send to them what we want. So what we send to them before they review and give us the money is the MEFP. It's all on their website. So if you go to MEFP number 11, it states authorities intend to make DRM a key plank of the program and raise revenue from 18.5% to 15 point, from 15.7% to 18.5. Currently, our revenue as a percentage of GDP is 15.7. And the idea of the government is to move that to 18.5%.
Hello, Doc. Hello, Dr. Mpabi.
Period, which is 3 years. Again, the MEF says that, and this is word for word, I'm quoting. Norvan, I can hear you. I wonder if you can hear me.
We're having some breaks. I mean, if you can just make sure you are well positioned for us. And if the Prof. Lord Mensa, if you can accept being a speaker for us, we'll be very grateful. Let's also just remember.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I think it's better now.
Sorry, I'm driving.
It's better now. You can go
airport.
ahead.
I just had to park somewhere. I was going to wrap up quickly.
Yeah, yeah.
So, in effect, Ghana government in our MEFP 6 in page 57 of the document, fiscal consolidation strategy will rely on strong revenue enhancing measures. What that means is that Ghana government willingly told the IMF that we are going to generate more revenue. So give us the money. If you want me to put it in a layman's language. So whatever taxes we are going through or we are facing, it is not an IMF asking us to pay tax, but we as a country told IMF that this is what we are going to do. So give us the money. We will be able to raise the money to pay you. And remember, part of the document, there's a section that talks about Ghana's ability to repay the loan, which is what will guarantee whether we get the money or not. And that section actually looks at Ghana's ability in terms of revenue generation. So quickly to wrap up on the revenue measures of the IMF program. First one is that government is going to phase out or intends to phase out tax holidays and exemptions, including VAT exemptions, which has passed. And those who want to read the document, please look at paragraph 24, page number 13. There's also the need to increase the progressivity of the income taxes. Though, again, as I said earlier, those who are paying income taxes and are earning more than 50,000, you will know that your income taxes has already been increased on incomes above 50,000 threshold to a 35% from the previously 30%. There's also an auto adjustment as part of the revenue measures of our energy bills in light of inflation and exchange rate. Previously, you can enjoy your energy bills at a constant rate, maybe until the public sit up and decide. Now, there's a condition that every quarter it has to be reviewed and it has to be increased or possibly reduced in line with inflation and exchange rate. But knowing the rate of inflation in Ghana versus foreign currencies, we shouldn't expect reduction. We are going to expect increment throughout the course of the program. There's also the EVAT rollout, which is to me has been one of the success stories of this whole IMF. Even before we go into deeper, of course, we can't attribute the success stories to IMF, but the GRA, knowing this is going to happen, government was on their tail for them to do more. And we saw what GRA has done. As I'm talking to you, the last quarter report release shows that year has percent in this year. That should tell you that it is not about introducing new taxes. There are fantastic revenue potentials in the country. And as our president said, Yetisikasu, we really are sitting on money. But it's about how do we get GRA to be GRA? How do we stop the political interference? We all heard when GRA was rolling out this EVAT, there was a time they went to Kumasi and some public officials actually asked GRA to leave. But GRA cannot be GRA if there are political interference. And I'm just waiting for the day we wake up to have a GRA that is purely independent of any political interference. Because by giving them that small time, VAT has moved to 92% quarter by quarter comparison. As part of remit, the HMRIS with gift mix. Of course, this is not direct revenue. What that means is that ghost names, we are going to get rid of ghost names. Well, I might be too optimistic, but it looks likely that integrating HMRIs of government payroll into gift mix could help that. Another revenue potential is the e-commerce taxation. Of course, we've been talking about this for years, and it's an area that the fund is pushing government. Page 20, paragraph 24, page 13, and page 66 talk about this, about e-commerce taxation, how government should move. We have all seen Meta, which is Facebook, now saying that if you want to advertise, you'll be subject to about 21.5% or so taxes. All that. And this is not what we are asking the government to do. What we are asking the government to do is that we want government to tax the revenue in Ghana by the foreign companies, the digital companies. We are not asking Ghana government to introduce VAT on Meta. Of course, it is good that as we consume across board, the VAT should be applicable. But by introducing VAT and allowing Meta to just announce that without any measure to tax Meta sales in Ghana, we are still losing. And Kenya has 3% digital tax service tax rate. Nigeria has 6%, and all these are working. Again, I'll repeat, like I said earlier, Kenya made about $5 to $6 million in a period of 8 months by introducing a standard 3 years to get revenue, which to me is very much of a concern. Is the cut in statutory funds. Already, these funds already cut, but government even consider to cut them further. Read paragraph 35 and 36, page 35, 36, sorry, page 35, 36. You will see the intention of government as part of the IMF program to cut. But one thing I find very strange is that the statutory funds themselves are that most of the fiscal infrastructure in Ghana is done by statutory funds because they have better regulatory policy. So I was very surprised to see that on one hand, the fund is praising the work of the statutory funds, but on the other side, suggesting that government should cut this. As I'm talking to you, there's a consultant that has been hired by the ministry, by the government, sorry, to work to assess all the statutory funds. And here I'm talking about the GET fund, education funds, and for them to now assess if there's value for money, if there's a duplication of functions, and if possibly move them back to their respective ministries. Of course, we all know what is happening in some of those ministries. So to me, I would have loved even giving them more, because we know how reduction in GET fund is impacting on education and other areas. We also have one way one government want to get more revenue is the implementation of the tax exemptions law. We have the exemptions law passed since 2022, but we've been less active with it, and government hopes to get something. 3 new taxes, as you be aware, has been passed in this year. We have the growth and sustainability levy, which I talked about. We have excise taxes and the one I call the investor movement of non-tax revenue. So
hello, Doc.
Government want revenue, non-tax revenue makers Hello, Norvan.
Still some breaks on your thing. If you can wrap up in just a matter of 2 minutes for
Okay.
us, please.
Yes, 2 minutes. I'm wrapping up. Can you hear me now? Hello,
Yes,
Norvan.
we can hear you. Yes, we
Okay.
can hear you. Just
Okay.
wrap up for us. Okay, it looks like we have lost Dr. Alex Ampabi on there. So what we'll do is to move to our next speaker, and our next speaker would take us to the energy and extractives, and then after that, we would come and have a look at the expenditure side and the business owners what they also think, what the challenges are. We are sorry that we have to lose Dr. Ampabi this way, but we also want to inform you that we're also live on ABC News GH Television tonight. We are live on ABC News GH Television, and we are also live on all their social media handles. And we are live here on Twitter, and this is in collaboration with Citizens Ghana, which is We Be Citizens, and the Economic Governance Platform, and it's a Norvan Reports production. My name is Norvan Akohifo. If you just joined us, it is our town hall where we look at the 2023 mid-year budget concerns and expectation. So we're going to have Mr. Ben Boache also take on right now, and he's going to look at the extractive and the energy sector, the extractives. When I talk about extractives, if you are a bit confused about it, we're talking about the mining sector. And mining is not only gold, diamond, bauxite, and all the, including oil and gas. So anything that we take from the belly of the earth, or we need to dig the earth and take it, we classify them as the extractives. And then we have the energy sector, which is the normal energy that we are enjoying with electricity and all that. So he's going to tell us what has been the major concerns, Mr. Boache, if you can hear me and you can mute yourself. What has been the major concerns for you in this year 2023, and also even looking at the IMF program and its impact on our budget, and what would be your considerations that you would want to suggest to government going into the next half of the year? Mr. Boache, please.
Hello, Norvan. Thank you very much, and good evening to. I think let's give us a background on what we are to expect and contribute. Further into the year, we already started from the 2023 budget implementation of some measures that actually call on citizens to contribute to salvaging the situation that we are in economically. When citizens are contributing that much, the least we expect is for some prudent decisions to be taken across the board, and particularly looking at the energy sector where we stand to be make or unmake by how we manage that sector. We need some critical positive decisions to be made. As we have said consistently, you look at the energy sector, and I don't see any sector that generates as much waste like the energy sector. And you look at the power sector and its connection with oil, it makes it really important that the budget is different, or the media review is different from what we have seen in the past, where it's more rhetoric about actions and nothing gets done. And again, I must stress that all of us must be committed to supporting government and our country to sail through this IMF program to bring the economy back into a sustainable path. If you look at the IMF program, I've indicated that it may not be a blueprint for our long-term economic sustainability, but it holds a lot of positives that if we're able to watch carefully and abide by what we ourselves have agreed to do, we would be able to pull through. Let me start from the oil and gas sector. First of all, we're expecting about 1.4 plus billion for 2023. Indications are that we are not going to receive that much. We may drop close to 400 to half a billion in expectation. They recently announced, additions from Jubilee may bridge the gap a little bit, but still there will be a gap. And even if you lose $100 million shortfall, I'm wondering which other sector can bridge it. Which other sector will be able to generate revenue to fill that gap? So certainly we're going to have a gap on revenue expectation from the oil sector. The gold sector, we may see some stability because a chunk of our revenue already comes from the large scale sector, which we haven't seen any significant shocks that may derail our expectation from the gold sector. I mean, you mentioned that extractive is beyond gold, but in Ghana, we have gold giving us about 98% of our revenue. So when we talk about solid minerals, it's really gold. So we may get the revenues that we expect to get from the extractive, the solid mineral sector. What we would miss out would be, the small scale sector that we've been trying to optimize over time, where, we had tax impositions that made it difficult for us to track revenue from that side. But with a government policy to introduce the gold for oil, now government controls that purchase value chain. So BOG is the one supposed, and I say supposed advisedly, to buy the gold. They have really struggled to do the purchases. At one point, smuggling was at all-time high because nobody was buying from government's side, and then nobody was also licensed to actually buy the gold. So you had smugglers buying the gold even at a discount to what the market was actually dictating, or government was buying it before it struggled to continue. Sad, post that, we've seen some companies giving licenses to buy gold for, Bank of Ghana. There's so much lack of transparency around that. So government obviously will not get revenue because that tax revenue has been waived because government is the one buying it. So the gold for oil makes it difficult for us to get, tax revenue from the small scale sector. So we cannot expect revenue to come from that side. It also introduced additional shock on the oil side because you have BDCs that would have traded more, paid taxes. Now government has taken between 30 to 40% of that space also. So boss will not pay tax to Ghana government, but it's become a major player in that space. So we'll lose some revenue also downstream from that side. I don't know how that will be bridged from government's perspective. And that clarity around gold for oil and how it affects the economy broadly. We want to see some policy actions on that. There's commitment to the IMF for a review of the program. No details are out actually at this point, but we're hoping that the budget review, would actually give us clarity and detail on how we go from here. All right, and I don't even know whether the local businesses that were already in the space before their licenses were revoked still have capital to even come back to play in the space if the decision was reversed. So it's such a murky situation that will have to be resolved somehow through the budget. The elephant in the room really is the power sector, where consistently we sell power, we buy power from IPPs, we sell it to consumers, a lot gets stolen. In simple terms, equipments are old and a lot of energy is wasted in that process. So we're not able to recover enough revenue to be able to pay the value chain. So government is the one that is called upon to fill the gap or provide revenue for the shortfall. The budget itself estimates that on business as usual, this year we're going to do about 23 billion Ghana cedis of under recoveries, which requires the government has to fill that under recovery. You project that into 2026, we will be doing around 97 billion Ghana cedis. Right? That is far more than what government plans to intervene on fiscal infrastructure in education, agriculture, health, social protection, and the rest of it, where we're hoping to do about 48 billion in total. So it's not an acceptable situation. We need to find ways to reverse that. And the commitment of government to the IMF is that the recurrent situation will be handed to ECG for ECG to be able to take up all the future purchases from IPPs and the value chain, including the gas. So if government ECG was able to do that, then we essentially would have stopped the 23 billion that we're going to have to pay this year and allow ECG to collect revenue, sell power, and be able to pay it. And you would have realized that in the last 9 months or so, the tariff has been adjusted by almost 100%, 98 to 100%, depending on which bracket you're in. But surprisingly, the data that we have seen actually shows that things have gotten worse, even with the revenues that we're supposed to be getting, or the tariff adjustment that has actually been granted ECG. Historically, if you look at the past 3 years, ECG on average was doing about 50% of the revenue requirement. What that means is that if the value chain, generates a bill of 1 billion, ECG was able to take 500 million, and then Ghana government tops up with another 500 million. But what we saw from the cash waterfall mechanism and their report for March and April, in that period, ECG actually did 11.2% of revenue requirement, which means that out of the 3.9 billion Ghana cedis that was required for that 2 months, ECG was able to do only 430 million. So there is a bill outstanding that has to be paid. And that would also add up to the debts that have already accumulated. And that's why you saw the IPPs, pushing to shut down some of their plans, because their debt had accumulated to about 1.7 billion. We know some arrangements have been reached. Some have been paid 15 million, 2 million, 3 million. We don't know the exact figure even as of now, because transparency, again, is the hardest commodity to actually find in our country today. So we don't even know how much is outstanding as of today. But the reality is that the waste is still accumulating, and we need to find money to be able to address that. So I don't know how the budget is going to treat that and be able to assure us that ECG will be in a position to take on the recurrent debt that will be generated from the sector. What we are worried, and we also want to see a government address, is some coordination to get all the sector agencies to appreciate that Ghana is in crisis, right? For ECG, for VRA, for GridCo, for the ministry, which is also the coordinating body on the energy space, to appreciate that we are in crisis, and they have to be very optimal and prudent in decisions that they make. And so far, we haven't seen that. All right, we've had to criticize some of the decisions that have been made. For example, the AXA contract that was recently renegotiated, right? And this is a contract that was expiring to relieve us from that duty of tying ourselves to that take or pay commitment on that power plant. And we have stated consistently that in our power mix, we don't need such old plants in our power mix. AXA already is over 20 years old, all right? And then Ghana government is committing another 15 years of 40% take or pay to that 20-year-old plant, and convincing ourselves that that old plant will be able to generate power efficiently, use the same molecule of gas to generate power like the way early power and the Amandis of today will do. And that is unfortunate. I mean, nobody should convince us that for power stability, the great stability and consistency of supply in 21st century, we should be signing on to 20-year-old power plants, right? Technically, a plant between 20 and 25 years is dead, right? And these are engines that were brought in used. Already they've made about $750 million from us, whilst delivering just 16% of the time that we contracted them for. But we have paid them in full. So how then do we sign take or pay for one, a dead plant, and a plant that is paid for? So it appears ECG and the energy ministry, and they don't appreciate it. So they are dropping in more inefficiency, and the people are going to be called upon. As I indicated, we have already paid, adjusted the tariff almost 100%, and the indications are that we are going to keep adjusting the tariff, and it's not generating the solution that we need to actually salvage the situation. Added to that, you also have additional take-or-pay plants that are going to get ready. The early power plant will be ready this year. I think they've started commissioning already. So once they are ready, it becomes another take-or-pay plant. So if you have these plants coming up, why are you signing on to dead ones that have already run their course and we are paid for? All right. So those checks have to come from policy direction from the central government through the budget for us to be able to regulate the agencies and get them to be more efficient. We have been complaining lately about ECG not getting meters. We are told that now, in 10 days, they will start rolling up aggressive supply of meters for people who want it, who needs the meters. That is good news, but we really have to push it to make sure that we can monitor the inefficiencies. The inefficiencies are way too much, the commercial losses in particular. All right. When you give ECG $1 million of power, it is guaranteed that 30% cannot be accounted for, either through theft or through old equipment. And that is so unacceptable for us to continue to tolerate without improving the system. So a lot is required in this budget to make Ghana sustainable. And that would also depend largely on what policy actions are being rolled out. It's unfortunate that the commitment to bring up a plan, according to the IMF program, the ESRP phase 2 was supposed to have been outlawed and made public end of June. We are almost towards the end of July. We haven't seen the program. That also talks about attitude and how aggressively we are trying to address the energy sector challenges. I thought it was only ASEP that hasn't been engaged so far on what plan government wants to have, but also talking to other, NGOs. So it's again government IMF program on how they resolve the energy sector. We can only wait to see the document and see how that will be able to resolve the energy sector problems. But we need all hands on deck at this point. We want to see very efficient decisions taken at this point for us to be on a sustainable path. So, Norvan, I will leave it here for others to also intervene.
Thank you very much. We are so grateful, Mr. Ben Wache. So Ben has really laid it out very well for all of us to understand what the challenges are and what the extractive sector is looking at. As we told you, it's a town hall. If you have any concerns, if you have any questions, you can tweet at us at Norvan Reports, or what you do is to wait. And when we get to the point where we bring you in, you send us a request, we make you a speaker, we're able to ask your questions. But for now, we are giving opportunity to all our speakers to be able to speak to us and then give us their overview of what this whole IMF period that we find ourselves and the budget plus, the media that the Minister of Finance will be going to Parliament. The next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, let me also inform you before I bring in the next speaker that we are live on ABC News GH television. And so take note of that. And then also you can always, retweet and inform someone that this all important town hall meeting is going on. All the important conversations are being had here on Twitter tonight. Now, Professor Bokpin is one that is an economist and professor of finance at the University of Ghana Business School. We all do know him. And we're going to have Prof also come in here and speak to us. After Prof, then we'll move on to Mr. Jackson, who would then also take us through the expenditure side a bit and then tell us what businessmen, because he is a businessman, the director of operations for Dalex Finance, is going to tell us what has been their challenges and what they're looking for, as far as the economy is concerned. Prof, let me bring you in here to help us get a better sense and understanding of the ECF that we find ourselves, what we've signed up for, and your considerations for the mid-year budget review. Professor Bopping, if you can take it from us, please.
All right, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. I apologize I joined a bit late, but I consider this a privilege to be able to share my thoughts and to relearn, and then also to also educate myself based on also the contributions and comments from members on this space. And every time I listen to them, I learn so much. So I'm also here to learn. I think at some point we all felt that the way the country was going, we needed an IMF-supported program. That call started trickling in actually from latter part of 2021. Our considered view was that the optimal time for Ghana to have signed up for an IMF program was in the third to the last quarter of 2021. But the signal was quite clear. When the government was in the Euro bond market towards the end of the third quarter of 2021, and the market kicked us out. That was the strongest signal. And I want to believe that if we were proactive and we had done the needful and maybe swallowed our pride and taken those proactive steps, maybe we would have been able to lessen the burden of the adjustment requirements under the 17th IMF supported program. But then government felt that they could use the 2022 budget, which then was presented in November 2021, to actually assure investors that yes, they had concerns with the fundamentals of our economy, but they had a solution. And obviously, when we looked at the 2022 budget, which was presented in November 2021, our conclusion was that independent of external investors or another policy analyst, our conclusion was that the 2022 budget did not offer a clear fiscal sustainability path, and that the revenue measures there wasn't going to work. The expenditure cuts in there were not sufficient enough to offset the revenue shortfall and to be able to contain the rising debt, especially when it comes to the interest cost. So a government made a call quite late, and therefore you realize that the IMF program, we actually started implementing the program before the May 17th board approval, because given our situation, they had considered that certain actions needed to be taken even before board approval, and those ones were prior actions and all of that. So now we have the IMF program, and again, going through the program, it fell short of our expectations. Let me put it that way. The reason I'm saying that it's not by design, it could have been better, is that government has sold this narrative to the IMF that our problem was largely revenue and that we were not generating enough revenue. And therefore, the program is heavily based on revenue generation. So more than 50% of the fiscal adjustments in the IMF program are all revenue-based. Of course, we'll say that fiscal consolidation, the mix can be both revenue and expenditure-based, but this is heavily revenue-based. That is fine. So that is one main defect. Then also, but of course, there's room for the country to generate more revenue. The next important thing there is to look at the revenue handles in terms of the strategy to increase our revenue from below 15% to 18.75%, 18.7% by 2026. The strategy the government has adopted is where the problem is in terms of the tax handles. And here we can be a bit specific and talk about VAT. So empirical evidence is very clear. The empirical regularity is very clear that once your VAT standard rate effectively goes above 17%, a 1% increase in that VAT rate inhibits growth. Even though government, through the decoupling, is sending a signal that our standard VAT rate is one of the lowest probably in Africa at 15%. If you add those straight levies, it takes it to more than 21% effectively, right? That 6% adds directly to the high productive cost base of doing business. Again, that makes your business uncompetitive. Then you also want to look at the corporate income tax, okay? So if you look at the totality of the tax handles bundled together under the IMF supported program, it will just burden the faithful few. And there is no way the country can engineer inclusive and sustainable growth from that. I will also talk about, so apart from that, my biggest concern actually under the program is how the program can deliver job-rich growth. We see that growth would decelerate to maybe 1.6% or slightly higher than that by then in 2023 before it picks up. The important thing is what kind of growth is that, right? Because if you look at our growth trajectory and then the volatility in our growth hasn't been sufficient. We have largely celebrated jobless growth. And that is why if you look at the data from Ghana Statistical Service, in terms of the number of people who are falling into poverty, the widening inequality, and the joblessness in the system, right? As we speak, more than 14% of Ghana's economically active age group are unemployed, right? So the important thing we need to ask ourselves is whether the growth that the IMF program has envisaged is growth that we can celebrate, is growth that we can associate with, is growth that is broad-based, that can rope in moderate and low-income earners, is growth that will come along with job creation. You don't see that in the program. And I think that is where the concern is. Growth is only sustainable if it's job-rich, if it's also inclusive, but that is not the kind of growth. So actually, if you look at the development literature today, the current discussion, you see that countries have moved beyond just celebrating GDP growth, right? Okay. And if you look at the program, the focus is more on GDP growth. And then also, if you look at the projections and you look at the drivers of that growth, we are not going to get employment from that. And once you are not going to get employment from that, you're going to see positive growth, all right, but your tax revenue may not expand in relation to the expansion in the economy because that growth is very tiny and insufficient. And if you want, if that growth that dwarfs your tax to GDP ratio, you are likely to burden the faithful few. That's the problem. So the important question we need to ask ourselves, and I think we need to have that national conversation, what kind of growth do we want to have? And the important thing also is what should be the drivers of that growth so that we don't have one size fit all. To come out of where we find ourselves, we need targeted policies. Okay. And if you see Ghana's problem in terms of the GDP decomposition, you see that just as maybe consistent share of agriculture to GDP contribution has been sliding. Okay, and maybe instead of industry picking it up, straight is service. So part of why Ghana, our inflation is very high, part of why we are importing so much is simply because of what we will call Ghana's missing middle. So I'm looking at an IMF supported program that responds to this structural bottlenecks, that responds to the need to create jobs. Okay, so I'm looking at it more because this is more like a foundation, right? But of course, since 1992, Ghana has been laying economic foundation since 1992 under the Fourth Republic. You check all the budgets from 93, 94, 95, everything is laying foundations. I don't know when we will finish the foundation and start putting up the house itself, right? Okay. So we need to scale up that conversation and say that okay. And then you will see also some because the IMF is very smart and they can see the challenge ahead. If you pick the 16th IMF supported program that kicked in from April 2015 to April 2019. In that program, one of the objectives of that program was to foster job creation. And that was expressed in that program. Job creation. Job creation. Okay. Return to inclusive growth and job creation. You will find that in that 16th IMF supported program. But when they finished the program, we asked the IMF, one of the program objectives was job creation. So can you tell us how many jobs did the program create? Okay, we didn't get an answer. Now, what was the IMF's response to that? The IMF response to that in the 16th IMF program is to be silent on job creation as an outcome variable, right? So I can understand also when the president says that the IMF program is not a immediate solution. Of course, we know that the IMF program doesn't solve all our problems. So, and if you a proper diagnosis of the problem would say that yes, it's also largely governance. It's the governance failures, institutional failures that are manifesting explicitly in economic mismanagement, right? So, if the problem is also largely governance, the solution cannot be financial and economic, as you see it largely in the IMF program. Of course, we see a little bit of structural reforms, but they are not deep enough. And the point is that to be able to come out of this inclusively and sustainably, we have to be able to bundle those productivity enhancing reforms, structural reforms, product market reforms. We need to bundle them together because reforms are more effective if they reinforce each other, if they are bundled together. We are not seeing that in this program. And once you are not seeing that in this program, you see that at the end, you will get some temporary relief, like a painkiller. But at the end of the 3 years or so, the problems would emerge. Because if you see the program design, we can achieve the inflation target maybe by 2025 or early 2026. We can return inflation to 8% plus or with a symmetrical rate of 2%. That is possible. But then you want to look at the adjustment process that we have to go through in order to return inflation to single digits. And the important question you need to ask yourself whether for the medium, the long term, right, for the foreseeable future, whether it's possible we can accommodate zero financing of the budget from the central bank. The answer will be no. And therefore, when we exit the program, we are certainly going to unwind. And once you do that, you realize that the fundamentals wouldn't, or the structural reforms wouldn't be adequate enough to sustain the gains. And then the problems will emerge, and probably we have to go back to the IMF. These are the issues. Then also the other bit is the expenditure. In as much as we talk about expenditure cut, it's not every expenditure that we should be cutting actually. So, and if you look at the program expenditure cuts in the IMF supported program, they are contrary to our expectations. They are contrary to our expectation. If you are cutting down on capex when you should be spending more because you actually don't have the infrastructure, and the fiscal savings from capex cuts is 0.9% of GDP.
Hello, Prof. Ladies and gentlemen, for some reason, we can't hear Prof. Prof, if you can hear me, can you speak for us? I'm sure there are some bit of technical challenges. Forgive us. These are normal. Internet technology always give us some challenges here and there. But just so as we wait for Prof to come back, let me just inform you that this is the Norvan Reports Economic Governance Platform with Citizen Ghana's town hall meeting. Today's Twitter space is a town hall where we're giving opportunity. We brought all the technocrats that you need, and we brought them together to allow you to hear them, give us a better sense and understanding of the IMF program, and also share their concerns and their, expectations of the mid-year budget review, which will be read on Tuesday by the Finance Minister, Mr. Ken Ofori-Atta, in Ghana's Parliament. And before we had that small glitch was Professor Bokpin, who is an economist and also a professor of finance. Yes, thank you very much, Prof. We couldn't hear you, but I'm happy you are back.
Yes, I'm back. So the point that I'm making is that the planned expenditure cuts, all put together in the within the program period, is 2%, 2.1%. And then the revenue side is going to contribute 3%. So the total fiscal savings in terms of the fiscal adjustment is just 5% by 2026. Now, if you look at where our debt to GDP ratio is, and if you want to reduce your debt to GDP ratio in present value terms to 55% or below 55% by 2028, then the level of fiscal adjustment that you need to make should be more than 12%, okay, or your primary surplus, because there are two levels of deficit. There's one deficit that contributes to increase in your debt to GDP ratio. And then we also have debt reducing fiscal deficit. The debt reducing fiscal deficit zone is when your primary balance is positive. Okay, so, and the primary balance that we are expected under this fiscal adjustment is just 1.5%. That is far below what we needed to record in order for debt sustainability to be restored by 2028. Now, because the fiscal adjustment is doing so small, the burden of the adjustment in restoring debt sustainability is now on creditors. It's now on creditors. Typically, you would expect that with ambitious and deep and comprehensive structural and governance reform, you will expect that in the medium to the long term, that would also contribute some savings in order to ease the burden. But for now, we are not seeing much from the area of structural adjustment reforms, governance reforms, and therefore we're unable to quantify the fiscal savings from there. To that extent, the burden then is on creditors, and that is why under the IMF supported program, you will see that the program financing gap of about a little above $15 billion, the bulk of that, a little above $10 billion of that, is actually going to come from relief from external debt restructuring. And the total external debt up for restructuring is around $20 billion. So you will see that there's a lot of risk even in translating the IMF supported program objectives into actual, because a lot then depends on what happens with our debt restructuring. And I'll give you two instances of what other countries have gone through. Take the case of Chad and the role of Glencore in the debt restructuring of Chad, and then look at the final debt restructuring of Zambia and how much relief they got. Okay, so you realize that there's so much that must happen from outside our control in terms of external debt restructuring, both external bilateral and external commercial, that there's risk over there, right? Then also, when you come to Ghana, you see some of the ambitious things that government is even doing, okay, in preparation for 2024, you will see that the outlook is quite problematic. Actually, it's quite problematic. Okay, so I'll end by saying that I'm expecting the media review to give us a little bit of clarity in terms of what kind of recovery Ghana is looking forward to. And I'm looking forward to the media review in terms of the recovery responding to the structural issues, challenges that we have. The World Bank is telling us the number of people who have been pushed into poverty. If you look at the inequality gap that is widening, if you look at unemployment that is increasing, and the rest of them, any recovery that fails to respond to this cannot be a recovery. Then you know it's not sustainable. And the rest of, so these are clear issues that I think the media review should clarify. And we have to be deliberate, and we have to have clear targets of how many people would this recovery pull from poverty. How would this narrow inequality? We have to be that specific, because these are I see these things as national security issues. If you see poverty rising like this, you see inequality widening, and the rest of them, none of us is safe. Okay, and then also I'm looking at a recovery that is also that addresses core inflation, that addresses food inflation. Food inflation is just too high in Ghana. In fact, if you look at it across the continent, our food inflation is one of the highest. Okay, so in an environment where income level is very low, okay, and where data from Ghana Statistical Service is telling us that between 42 to 45% of household expenditure is on food, then it means that if food inflation is rising, right, that is quite impactful. Now, the reality on the ground is that because food alone is taking almost 42 to 45% of our disposable income or our household expenditure, you look at housing, you look at transportation and all of that, there's very little space for the average Ghanaian, even middle class, formal economy, in the formal wage economy, to be able to save and take advantage of even the limited economic opportunity that will be created. We can never create a society like this. I'm not even talking about what the domestic debt estimate has done in its financially repressive form, right? We are creating a financially repressed society, and there's no way a society can develop, right? And when we are doing these things, the last thing I want to make is this: we have allowed government to just push through the narrative that we need to restructure our debt, we need to restructure our debt. Actually, if you look at the maturity reprofiling that they have done, it's more of shifting the burden maybe to beyond 2025 or so. Okay. And if you look at the growth projections, the cash flow projections, if you do the cash flow projections and you look at the maturity profile of our debt, both principal and then coupon, there is no way Ghana will be in a position to sustainably, okay, contain the reprofiling of the debt that we have done. What that tells you is that 2026, when the program is ending, if we do any debt sustainability, the conclusion will be that our debt is still unsustainable. And what that will mean is that the next 2 years, between 2026 and 2028, it will be too short for Ghana to restore debt sustainability per the IMF cut-off date. Either we extend the cut-off date beyond 2028, or we embark upon another draconian domestic debt exchange. These are issues that I think we need to have a broader conversation on, and we need to ask ourselves, the debt restructuring we have done, how sustainable is it? What guarantees that beyond 2024 the economy will just jumpstart or bottom out certainly to be able to contain that? There's no guarantee. There's no guarantee. Okay. So these are things that, and then the bigger issue is that if, assuming you even have the time and you want to do the modeling beyond 2025, there's so much uncertainty. That is even for the economists. I don't manage any business, but you can imagine for the business community who have to plan medium to long term, the uncertainty is just too much. But we all know that everybody prefers relative certainty. If you look at the tax environment alone, since COVID came, the changes to our tax environment in terms of both at the policy level and then at the administrative and compliance level, is just too much. And that is uncertainty. It's difficult to plan for 1 year, for 2 years, for 3 years. It's difficult to plan, forecast your cash flow, your dividend, return on equity, and all of that. All this uncertainty is just not good. So I believe that Ghana we need to take another look at all of this, and I think there should be broader consultation so that we're able to offer some kind of relative certainty that is good for planning, because the state exists first and foremost for businesses and for households. Okay. And then also the other thing we need to push through is to have a right balance between governance costs, which usually doesn't promote growth, and then how we can free up space for growth enhancing spending. My baseline conclusion is that the governance cost, the cost of operationalizing our democracy, is just too much and it's not sustainable. I think that is the message, that's the conclusion, that's what Ghana has gotten to, that we have monetized and commercialized our democracy, both in the run-up to the election and then post-election, to the extent that we are at the point where we cannot sustain it. We are at the point where, regardless of how much tax revenue we generate relative to the size of our economy, we cannot sustain it. And that is why now we are falling on people's savings, we are falling on people's investment through haircut and the rest of them. I think we need to look at the governance cost. Other than that, I don't think that we can have a future. And the way we have done it, this is what we have done. If somebody is looking at it today, that if I join politics, maximum 4 years, I can recoup my initial cost of my investment. I'm far better off joining politics than going to the private sector or than being in pure public service. That is what is happening. The incentive mechanism we have created is such that it is disadvantageous actually being in private sector or being in pure public service as compared to politics. And as you can see with some of the information coming out, quite recently, the economy in people's bedroom is quite resilient and robust than the official economy you see out there, right? And that's the kind of system we have created. That's the signal we are sending to the market. So today, people die for a political party than actually building a business, than actually working with integrity to have a comfortable lifestyle. Those who feel that they can have that in the private sector or maybe in pure public service, they are leaving the country. The doctors are leaving, the nurses are leaving. They are leaving.
Wow.
Thank you.
Wow. Thank you very much, Professor Godfred Bokpin. Prof is a professor of economics and also professor of finance at the University of Ghana Business School. And I think that he's laid out very important issues for us to even continue the discussion with. If you just joined us, this is the Norvan Reports Economic Governance Platform and Citizens Ghana's Twitter space town hall meeting before the media budget review. I understand the media budget review has been moved from Tuesday now to 27th, which is Thursday. So please take note. It's on Thursday that the Minister of Finance will be going to Ghana's Parliament to give us a better sense of how the economy has performed in the first half of the year. And if he needs more money and all that, then he might come by way of what they call supplementary budget, where he would ask for more things, and probably if he has to introduce new taxes, he will do that, as far as he appears before the people's representatives, that is Ghana's parliament. And Prof has told us tonight that, he asked a very important question. How sustainable is the debt restructuring that is ongoing? Because we don't think we have seen the end of sight of that yet. And then he talks about so much uncertainties within the economy, which makes it difficult for businessmen to be able to plan. He talks about governance costs, which has become the bedrock of this economy and has made it very difficult for us to be able to move ahead as a nation. And so put that at the back of your mind. I've seen some of your questions that you've tweeted at us. We will be asking those questions, but I want to bring in Mr. Joe Jackson. When he's done, we will put your questions to the first 4 guests who have spoken, and then we'll move on to the next related guest. Ladies and gentlemen, bear with me. Tonight is a town hall meeting. We'll extend a little bit. Forgive us. It is normal for us to have a town hall meeting where we all try and judge or share ideas, pick information, and see how we can help, as Prof will say, jumpstart or restart the engines of this economy. So, Mr. Jackson, you are a businessman, and you are the Director of Operations for Dealers Finance, a finance house in this country. We want to understand from your side. I mean, I've seen you also as a social commentator, followed, what happens as far as the economy is concerned. If you look at the expenditure of government as it is, I know Prof has mentioned a bit of it, you think it's sustainable, and how is that impacting on your business or the business community from where you sit?
Okay, Norvan, thank you very much. I will actually take it at a very specific level. You know that there are two things that consume our expenditure: salaries and debt service. And salaries have been frozen, and there's very little we can do in that sphere at the moment. The challenge we have is this, that because the government is not enthusiastic about reducing its expenditure in terms of the other areas, the SOEs and the like, they continue to pile up costs in the area of treasury bills. And we are actually now in the very weird space where we're using treasury bills, which are primarily short-term and meant only to smooth over the cash flow of government. We are using treasury bills for long-term financing of our budget deficit. That is a disaster waiting to happen. We've willy-nilly driven treasury bills to as high as 29% for 360-day and 24% for 91-day treasury bills. That's crazy. It is crazy because this is in an economy where the government has set long-term rates at 12% from the DDEP, or if you like, 13% from the restructuring of the cocoa bills. So we've piled on another 7 billion in short-term treasury bill costs since the beginning of the year. One of the things we'd like to see clearly from the mid-year review is how are they going to finance the deficit, which they estimate at 60 billion going forward? How are we financing that deficit? Are we going to try and continue to finance it from T-bills? That is plain wrong. Financing from T-bills exposes this economy to risk, right? And is leading to higher yields and costing the public purse even higher. And at some point, this government will not be able to honor its costs, its bills. Then there'll be a bigger problem. Professor Popkin talked about the burden of our present predicament falling largely on those who have loaned the government money, rather than a structural adjustment to fix it, rather than a reduction of expenditure to fix it. That problem is staring at us. And the T-bills is a very specific example of how we don't seem to be doing the right thing, and we are already opening another avenue for disaster. The risk there is high. Even the World Bank has warned us. Institutions like Fitch have warned us. I'm looking forward to the budget and seeing how the government plans to fix this. Another area of concern for me is the financial sector as a whole. The domestic debt exchange program left us with huge holes. The cocoa sector alone leaves us with an estimated the cocoa sector and the cocoa bills restructuring leaves financial institutions with another bill of up to 3.3 billion when you calculate the net present value of what you had versus what of spreading it over the next 5 years. The question is, the financial sector was already in trouble. The restructuring of cocoa bills has created more trouble. The central bank itself, by securitizing the 77 billion that it gave to government in deficit financing, does not have any space to support these institutions. The Stability Fund, much talked about, has not received as much money or only commitments, but no money to date. Would like to hear from the Ministry of Finance and from the budget how they hope to support the financial sector through these challenging times that are actually a result of the programs that the Ministry of Finance has put in place to restructure debt. So the major challenges ahead, and my challenges are just from where I sit are two. Are you going to continue to use T-bills to finance this country's long-term development, and at what cost? Are you going to help support the financial sector, which was already reeling under the domestic debt exchange program before you landed in another blow of the cocoa bills restructuring? Those are two critical issues. With respect to uncertainty, Professor Bofkin has talked about it. The longer the dotting of the I's and the crossing of the T's for the IMF program, the more uncertain it is. The first half of this year, most companies are in limbo. There's a wait and see attitude. We all thought that the signing of the IMF deal will signal stability and an eventual return to a climate that is allows us to plan better. That has not happened. It hasn't happened because the IMF program has begun, but not all the issues have been resolved. So we're hoping to see clear deadlines where this will be resolved, clear deadlines where we will restore to stability, so that the little growth that is expected can even begin. Companies can start tending to business and asking ourselves, how do we start to prosper and create avenues for our staff, for our shareholders, and for the community and the country. So, Norvan, those are the risks that I look at.
Okay, so thank you very much, Mr. Jackson. If you just joined us, it's the Norvan Report, Economic Governance Platform and Citizens Ghana's town hall meeting, Twitter space. We come to you every 2 weeks and we bring the most important topics to be discussed. But tonight, we're having a town hall meeting discussing concerns and expectations with regards to the budget, which I understand will be the Minister of Finance will be going to the People's Representatives House on Thursday, which is 27th of July. So take note of that. Now, what I'm going to do before I bring in the other speakers, we're going to go and take a bit of your questions that you've tweeted at us. And thank you so much to those of you who are retweeting and making people aware that this conversation is going on. Let's all try to retweet and invite more people to join the conversation. So I would first go to the legal alien rights. And he says, well, interesting facts there. Why pride yourself with so many budgets that actually becomes bad in a leadership manner of expenses. And he goes on to put another one. He said the IMF is to get government money for government activities. And if the activities of government are party shifts, and many party does not do this better, what kind of toughness is sort of developing? I don't really quite get your question legally, alien legal, if you can do that. But ACW, right? Countries have gone beyond GDP growth. Then what's the way forward? What's the way forward? I mean, this question, if I can have Professor Bopin note it down, you'll be answering this question for us. I mean, you talk about the fact that many countries have gone beyond GDP growth. So what's the way forward for us as a country? Now, DG also tweets at Norvan Report. He says, please, can the government take control over the exportation of certain minerals like gold as it's doing for cocoa? So, Mr. Ben Boache, I will be coming to you to answer this particular question. This one is for you. It says that, can the government take control over the exportation of certain minerals like gold as it's doing for cocoa? So you will tell us what you think about that. Eric Aka also writes, please, will it be possible for government to review all the agreement we have with foreign companies in the extractive sector? So this question also is for you, Mr. Bemboache. Please take note of it. I'm taking the question again. He says, will it be possible for the government to review all agreements that we have with foreign companies within the extractive sector? And then Daniel Otu also, this will be the last one, and then I'll have my guests answer these questions, and then we'll move on to the next guest that we have. Daniel Otu also tweets at us. He says, what accounts for the $400 to $500 million deficit in the expected 1.9 billion revenue from the ONG sector, that is oil and gas sector? Has it got to do with fluctuations? First half of the year averages in terms of oil is averaging around $75 per barrel. So is it a case that government overestimates what it could get? Can it be can you throw some light on that for me? So I think I would then have you, Ben, unmute yourself. And there are 3 questions that are for you. Then after that, I'll have Professor Bopin answer the other 2 questions. And then we'll move on to our next guest. But I have a question for you, Mr. Jackson. I will come back to you as well. So, Ben, if you can unmute yourself for us, please. Hello? Mr. Ben Boache? Wow. Okay.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry, I was struggling to. Can you hear me?
I'm sure you had the question, right?
Yes. So one was on the oil, what is accounting for the shortfall, and one was
what is accounting for the 400 to 500 million shortfall. And he's talking about the fact that currently the average for oil that's crude is $75 per barrel. Is it a case that
is the price that is actually accounting for the shortfall? Because we projected the 1.4 billion was projected on $88 per barrel, and the average this year has been around 74. So you're certainly not going to get as much as you projected. So basically, we overestimated the price. Okay. But the price was good last year. We thought we could get the same. There was another point on whether
is it possible for the government to review all agreements on foreign companies in the extractive sector? Is it possible?
I mean, what is the basis for that review? I don't get it. Is every country learns? All the countries in the world have learned to structure agreements and improve them as they go along. I don't see what calls for a review of all agreements. What we have to do is to optimize our interest in all these agreements. And I keep telling government and citizens who are always thinking that we are not getting as much as we should get. The question you should be asking is, what do we do with what we get? There are ways of optimizing revenue. You need to understand how much it costs to be able to produce the natural resources. And then you need to be able to account for how much is produced. If you miss these 2, regardless of how much you have on paper relative to agreements, you're not going to make much as a country. And over time, we've not paid attention to the 2 dynamics, estimating and getting the actual production right, and also getting to know what exactly the cost of production really is. And those are the significant deficiencies that has lived with us over the years. and governments don't really pay attention to that. The point about whether we should also, buy all products from the extractive sector, I don't know why. I mean, we can take the cocoa sector as an example, right? Cocoa board has the sole responsibility of just buying the cocoa. They are not the farmers. They are not the ones who produce. They don't bear the risk of production, right? But they are making losses by just buying cocoa to go and sell and pay, farmers at a discount. And it's become one of the biggest risks to our economy today. So I wouldn't encourage that. We always have to make sure that what we have to take, it takes investment and it takes the ownership of the resources. The ownership of the resources is not enough. You need investment to be able to activate the ownership of the resources. And you need to be able to pay attention to that process to make sure that what is due you are not cheated. And then what you get as a result of the extraction is properly managed. And we can talk about that in another conversation, how we have managed our revenues. If you put our gold receipts and our oil receipts together, it is probably net off by our waste in the power sector. So that tells you that we are not optimizing our receipts, and you can't blame anybody, either the producer or the investor sitting in London or in UK or in New York, for that. We have to own the process of proper decision making. I think Professor Bofin summed it up. The problem is governance, and if you fail to deliver good governance across the spectrum of governance, we will not be able to deliver value for our people.
Okay, the very last one before you go has to do with, can government take control of exporting of more other minerals, with the exception like what they've done for gold, for cocoa? Can we take control of gold, bauxite, and all that? What's your opinion on it?
So that is the point I made. We are exporting cocoa as a sole purchaser, right? And we are creating mess, right? If the private sector was doing that, Cocoa Board will not be hanging debt on our books. People's investment will not be at risk today. Banks will not be struggling because Cocoa Board has messed up. Go and look at all the executives in Cocoa Board. They are better off than the Ghanaian budget. So that is the problem we invite for ourselves when we think that government can do it, when the governance is the poorest part of the chain.
Okay.
So let's watch it carefully and make sure that whatever is due us is properly optimized and we use it well.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Professor Bopin, there's a question that has to do with, the GDP. I mean, other countries have gone beyond GDP. What's the way forward for us as a country? Prof.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. So the point is that GDP is not adequate in measuring economic performance. The idea traditionally has been that focus on GDP growth and then it will trickle down, and also in terms of the redistribution. But it's very clear that the trickle-down effect has failed, and therefore overfixation on GDP actually ignores other important aspects of our well-being that is often overlooked simply by over-concentrating on GDP. In the case of Ghana, I'll give you an example, and actually that's from the World Bank report, right? So the World Bank is telling us that between 2013 and 2019, nearly 20% of Ghana's GDP growth came from mining. Okay, between 2013 and 2019, nearly 20% of Ghana's GDP growth came from mining. Within that same period, employment generation within the sector actually fell. Okay, so certainly that is not growth that is beneficial to the people. Okay, of course, you will see that, okay, that growth would also come with higher tax revenue to government. But if you find a government like we have here that is largely inefficient, then the redistribution effect will not benefit the people. Then also, if you look at our economy, in fact, our country depends so much on nature, the planet. Okay, so the destructive activities of GDP is poorly reflected in the GDP calculation. And therefore, we are likely to see GDP, positive GDP, and yet the environmental and biodiversity degradation or destruction will not be reflected in that GDP. And so, and therefore, we are actually undermining the ability of the country to live sustainably going forward. Okay, so is this so? For instance, if you look at what Galamsey is doing to our environment, beyond that, if you also look at the source of the growth in other countries, yes, they are able to look at the trickle down effects to some extent because you are also looking at the growth drivers. If the growth is driven by the intensive labor intensive subsectors of the economy, then the understanding is that the growth will benefit those who derive their livelihood from that sector. But if you look at the case of Ghana, it's not like that. If you look at the GDP composition today, you see service. The service there is not quality service. It's not really job rich. Agriculture is seeding. And once agriculture is not doing well, it has implications. Industry is not doing well. In fact, our manufacturing sector is not doing well at all. Okay. Meanwhile, if you look at it from the social accounting metrics, right, in terms of the employment multiplier effect, income multiplier effect of agriculture productivity growth is very high. And yet we have not paid particular attention to that. And actually, the estimate exists that the inequality reducing effect of agriculture productivity growth is more than 0.4, right? Okay, so that sector is not doing well. So the point that I'm trying to make is that we should not necessarily proxy the recovery we are talking about by merely GDP picking up. No, we have to look at GDP in addition to many other indicators. And in my submission, I indicated that we have to be intentional about the growth that also, and we have to be clear that how many people did we lift out of poverty in the year. And we have to have that target and we have to track it. How is that growth narrowing inequality? Okay, that is very important because the point is that we are seeing growth, but we are seeing inequality widening. We have seen growth, but we have seen poverty rising. And anybody who has looked at the World Bank report and also look at the data from Ghana Statistical Service in terms of the rising poverty numbers, in terms of widening inequality, in terms of the number of Ghanaians who are not sure where their next meal will come from. In fact, over 600,000 Ghanaians who are also unemployed are also food insecure in one way or the other. I mean, quite a large number are equally multidimensionally poor. Okay, so we and if we merely focus on GDP, we may not be able to track all of this, but we have to be intentional that all of this are part of our development outcome that we are tracking on quarterly basis, on half yearly or on yearly basis. That is the only way we can have growth that makes every Ghanaian happy. Of course, some countries are looking at gross happiness index, social progression index, other human development indicators, in addition to the GDP growth. So that is how we have to look at it. And therefore, the fact that Ghana Statistical Service does their work and report that GDP has gone up by maybe 5.5%, they said doesn't mean that Ghana, it is well with Ghana. No. The point that I'm making is that we can have that, but that is not sufficient. We have to look at that which impacts people's lives directly. We have to look at the disaggregation. We have to look at how many people have lifted out of poverty. We have to have that clear target. I mean, and especially going to 2024, we expect that all the political parties must have clear targets. Let the political manifesto development be driven by data. Let it respond to the reality on the ground. They have to tell us how that growth will preserve our environment. Okay, and you and I, it should be possible for us in 3 months and 6 months time to go to our villages, our communities, and be able to drink from the waters that once gave us life. Because what we are doing right now, we are destroying the rural ecosystem that support life with water as its embodiment. And we cannot preside over something like this, right?
Okay. Thank you very much, Prof. We're grateful. Now we're going to go to Professor Lord Mensah. If my friend Kofi Asari, who is the executive director for EduWatch, is on the call, please send us a request so that we can just make you a speaker. Because after Professor Lord Mensah, we are coming to you so that you are able to help us. Prof, we want to talk to you in the area of monetary policy. I mean, from where you sit, Professor Lord Mensah, if you can hear me and you can unmute yourself. Hello. Good,
Yes,
great.
I can hear you, Norvan.
Great. Prof, so let's take it from the angle of monetary policy and what you see in there. You think the central bank, who are the clear managers of that side of our economy, has done a good job. Tomorrow, we will be hearing from the central bank with the issue of, or in the area of monetary policy committee meetings that took place last week or this week. Monday, the press conference is going to be on. We'll see where they're going to peg the rate at which they borrow to banks and financial institutions in this country. But from now, or at this point, do you think that they've done a good job? We've seen that now they have added the Bank of Ghana's debt to the total debt stock, and that has made it go even more higher. So even after the restructuring, we are still in the red line after we added the Bank of Ghana's debt.
Yes, you're right. I think our debt has risen by, I think, 20% or so. And clearly, it's as a result of the, indiscipline and the relationship between the government and the central bank. And I always say that the monetary policy operations in isolation cannot solve, the high inflation and then the high interest rate that we are witnessing now. The reason being that you cannot continue to target inflation whilst government is, spending in a way through financing from the central government. It's more or less a zero-sum game in a sense that on one hand, you are trying to catch, inflation, whilst, the government has been tapping financing from the central bank. And in the end, we don't see any impact on the inflation chasing. So from where I sit, it has to do with the relationship between the central bank and then the government. And the IMF program, makes it clear. And to a point, it highlights on the independence of the central bank being compromised. And I have not been surprised in a sense that the way we appoint, the central bank top, the governor, deputy governor, and it comes through the executive, definitely you're going to see that fine thin line. And there is a research I read some time ago that indicates the relationship between the central bank independence and then inflation. And any country that the central bank compromises its independence through the appointment of the governor, through other activities that the executive meddles with the bank, they find it difficult to control inflation. All this while, our inflation that we have been witnessing, I see, that inflation to be more or less a kind of artificial inflation. The real inflation is what we are facing now. So from where I sit, I think on the monetary policy side, we have little we can do. If you take the 2023 budget, there are some risk that clearly stares at us, and we foresaw it coming. You look at, the tightening of, the access to the international capital market, and then looking at the possibility of, IMF pushing government to, go on zero financing from the central bank. And I can tell you that this zero financing is not sustainable because government needs the central bank one way or the other to smoothen, the tax lapses, especially when we move into the new fiscal year.
So at least somewhere 5%, financing will not be bad. But to go on zero financing is quite a problem. But it's unfortunate that we've been pushed to, do zero financing, in a sense that, government was not disciplined and the central bank too couldn't stand on its grounds when the government was, requesting money from them to finance, deficit over the year. I will relay this to the entire budget and say that, yes, of course, 20 to 23 budget execution has been a problem. If you go onto the Ministry of Finance website, you'll come to see that they've not even published the appropriation bill. Under normal circumstance, appropriation bill should have been published by now. So you go there and you see by law what has been approved by Parliament in terms of releases and other things. And clearly you know that government is going to spend in this direction or not. This has, pushed government to, more or less concentrate on T-bills to finance its activities. And as Mr. Joe Jackson indicated, there is a risk here because you cannot continue to use short-term financing for long-term. You are always exposed to what we call the refinancing risk. Because at the point where, the 91 day, the 1 year will be matured, you may have to go onto the market, for which at that point, the long-term investment that you did, the cash flows from it has not come to a realization. So there is a mismatch here. And as a result of that, can expose the country at any point in time by pushing, interest rate up, because government will always be in need of, short-term instrument to offset existing short-term, debt. So effectively, it gives the signal that yes, indeed, we are pressed. And if you relate, the yield curve, if I say yield curve, what I mean is the short-term, interest rates are now higher than the long-term, which is a signal of economic depression. A signal of economic depression in a sense that, the investor community now has, have reduced their their long-term horizon to short-term. So it puts pressure on the short-term. And you cannot build a country with such a yield curve, because the long-term, which is now the restructured bonds, are selling for around 8%, 9% thereabout. And there's a liquidity problem there because there's no demand. And so effectively government has started concentrating on the T-bills, and that is, causing, the T-bills to go up and up and up as the interest rates has been showing on the ground. But that is not sustainable. And so I'm expecting this budget, right, clearly to indicate government should be bold enough to come out to show Ghanaians, that the demand for short-term, instrument will be no more. And how are they going to do that? They themselves indicated in the IMF program on how they're going to go about this, which is one of the ways of mitigating this, possible risk that they foresaw coming, a situation where most of the investments are going to be in the short term. Now, they have to look at, expenditure, especially looking at the discretionary expenditure. And possibly there are some capex that are non-essential, which they may have to
Can't
look
seem
at
to hear
them.
anything.
Now, with the essential capex, as we speak now, there are some roads that are being constructed. And those roads are purely, politically motivated roads. And if you do the analysis around roads, the benefit and the cost that is supposed to give us, you could see that clearly some of these roads, we don't need to construct them as we speak now, because it's a road that the number of cars that ply that road, you look at economic activities on that road, it tells you that whatever you are putting in, you are not going to recoup them now. But looking at our situation as we speak, whatever we spend on, it should be something that will generate back into the economy as as quick as possible. So effectively, we may have to look at that. The government also promised on enforcing the use of, the gift mix, in all transactions as of June. I may want to get from the budget how they're going to, the assessment on that, the implementation for up to what point has it been done. And then also, looking at the economic situation now, we need external funding because we've been locked from the international market. And then on the local market, all our investments are on short term. So we need external funding, for which, government put out there in the IMF program that strategically in 2023, they're going to leverage on private sector resources through PPPs. I may want to know how far they've gone with that. And then also arranging with, some, sovereign friends to come and buy some of our debts, especially on the IPPs. So I may want to see some of these things, being rolled out and the percentage that we've achieved, in the budget. I mean, clearly, we want to see a budget that is aligned with the IMF program. Other than that, we may not get the second tranche of the IMF program. Let me hint that the first tranche we got, you could see that the IMF relaxed some of the conditions, because the debt restructuring condition they gave us, it wasn't for only domestic, debt restructuring. It was both domestic and external, but they had to relax it because Ghana was in a dire situation. Without the first tranche, this economy would have been in trouble, because at the point where we're receiving the board approval, our external, support, I'm telling you, can cover only, just about, 1 to 2 weeks. So effectively, we were pressed, and they saw, the dire need of, the situation, and that is why we had to get, word of mouth from the U.S. embassy, ambassador to, the IMF authorities. We also got, China's support and all those to get a first tranche. But I think the second tranche, they're going to make sure that all the, the boxes are checked before we can tap into the second tranche. So the budget that we're coming to read must align with the IMF program, because if we don't do it that way, it will be difficult to get a second tranche. So from where I sit,
Okay.
it's supposed to be, a budget aligned with the IMF program. All the various risks that we foresaw, in the 2023 budget, are right at the doorstep staring at us.
Okay.
And how to go about it, is to just align the budget with the IMF program.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Lord Mensah, who is a lecturer at the University of Ghana Business School as well. He is also a professor of finance in that area. Now, let me quickly bring in Mr. Kofi Asari, or he prefers that I call him Kofi Asari. He's the executive director for EduWatch, and he's going to look at social spending. Then after him, we will go to your tweets, and then also we will use about 10 minutes to take your contributions and your questions, and then we'll move on from there. I've seen my good friend Kofi Bentel on the call. I think I'll give him the opportunity. So, Kofi, our counsel, I have sent you a request. You'll be the first person after Ms. Asari's presentation to also share some views with us, because you're a business strategist. What are your fears, and what do you think that must be done with regards to this economy, from where you sit? But first of all, we're going to talk about social spending of the government, and we're going to have Kofi Asari, director of EduWatch, to do that for us in the next 10 minutes. Then after that, we'll use the next 10 minutes to wrap up the whole conversation for tonight. So, Kofi, if you can hear me, please go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Norvan. One would ask, what has, an economic program got to do with social spending? Indeed, it is actually because there exists a vulnerable group in our society who need to be catered for in view of the harsh implications of the economic program that we are discussing social spending. And so the context within which the IMF program captures social spending is simply protecting the vulnerable from the harsh economic conditions and the implications of especially the increasing taxes on cost of living. So there are two dimensions of this. The first is that within the context of social protection, the program the Ghana government has committed to mitigate the impact of the increasing cost of living on the vulnerable by increasing the allocation to households under the LEAP program. We know the LEAP is Ghana's premier social protection program. There are currently about 1.5 million Ghanaians and receiving bi-monthly payments under LEAP. Prior to the program, the payment was in arrears for about 4 months. But because it's one of the key performance criteria under the program, government committed to increase it and also enhance the disbursement. And then also, the Ghana School Feeding Program comes under social spending. The government committed to also increase the per unit allocation to the program. So these are the three key areas under social protection. Between the time the program started and now, government, as announced in the 2023 budget, has increased the LEAP allocation by 100%. It means that a single beneficiary household, for instance, will be receiving 128 bi-monthly instead of 64. The bi-monthly for LEAP is not 2 weeks. It's not 2 weeks or it's not twice a month. It's actually once every 2 months. Okay. So from 64 to 128. Another important layer of protection is an indexation mechanism which the government has committed to introducing within the LEAP program. That will ensure that there are automatic adjustments to the LEAP allocations in line with inflationary trends as we proceed, so that it doesn't become a political intervention all the time for someone to increase the allocation. And so that is a condition to be met by September 2023. On the Ghana School Feeding Program, yes, the government has responded to the commitment in the IMF program by announcing a 20% increase in the per unit allocation for food for basic school students from 0.97 or if you like 1 cedi to 1 cedi 20 pesos. However, the 20% allocation, increment is often inadequate. We know many caterers are on strike. Many have said that they can't take again because in 2018, when the school feeding program per unit allocation was increased to 97 pesos, the 97 pesos was actually worth 2x. Today, even at the newly announced 1.20, 1 cedi 20 pesos, 1 cedi 20 pesos is worth 0.5 eggs. It can buy even 1 egg. And so, in all respects, the value of the per unit expenditure on the Ghana School Feeding Program is nowhere near reality. And so, that is how far government has gone with that. Our expectation for this budget is that government must announce a further increment in the school feeding program per unit cost from 1 cedi 20 pesos to 3 cedis, in line with how much government is paying for lunch, just lunch, in senior high schools, which is 3 cedis. Second, we expect government to update us with progress on the indexation mechanisms because the deadline in September is one of the key performance criteria. And then also within the context of social spending, government has also announced progress made in disbursing the 100% increase in LEAP, which was announced in the budget. I'm told that the disbursement actually started 2 weeks ago. Now, the next layer of government's interest is in, again, protecting the vulnerable, but within the education sector. And so government's interest in the program, insofar as education is concerned, or the implication of the program on education, is within the context of strengthening primary education resources. This means that government admits that primary education, or if you like, basic education, has suffered under resourcing in the past 3 years due to delayed disbursement of funds meant for running basic education. Government commits also strengthening teacher training. Now, these are the two key explicit, deliverables government commits to increase the capitation grant and then improve the disbursement of funds for basic education. Unfortunately, as we speak today, the capitation grant is still in arrears of 2 years. That's about 120 million. As we speak today, textbooks are in serious deficits, in our schools. As we speak today, 4 years after rolling out the new curriculum, we don't have a single workbook in the new curriculum in any school in Ghana, in primary schools. And due to certain circumstances, there are appropriation for Get Fund delayed. It should have been done in April. It extended to June. Weeks ago, Parliament approved it. And we thought we were going to see the allocation of Get Fund 2023 to be the first step of ensuring that we are increasing spending for basic education as contained in the IMF program. Unfortunately, we saw the least ever allocation to basic education in the history of Get Fund, which was only 12%. Majority of the funds went into the procurement of tablets for senior high school students. So it means that we are yet to see any significant show when it comes to basic education. I must admit that some 80 million was allocated for textbooks in the Get Fund formula, which was woefully inadequate because the ministry required 200 million to procure textbooks and only 80 million was allocated. So our expectation within the context of declining financing for basic education is that, one, the finance minister must announce an increment in the capitation grant from 10 to 20 cedis per head, because again, the capitation grant has suffered value. In 2018, when it was 10 cedis, it was worth 6 exercise books. Today, it is worth only 2 exercise books. So it has to be increased by 100% at least. And we expect that announcement to be made in the media budget because it's a condition that must be met by September. Second, we want the finance minister to go beyond that and indicate clearly a disbursement plan to ensure that the 2 years arrears of the capitation grant is paid, and also further assure stakeholders that announcing an increment in the capitation grant will not end there, but then will be followed by a commitment and a plan to disburse the grants timeously in line with the academic calendar for basic schools. We also finally expect the finance minister at mid-year to announce an allocation to make up for the deficit in the textbook allocation, which is the 120 million deficit required to ensure that our basic schools have adequate textbooks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kofi. But Kofi, just before you go, yes, you admit to the fact that there are challenges. The expenditure patterns of government need to be looked at. And with all that you are asking for, that's huge expenditures in there. How do you think government is going to find funding to do that? Don't you think that the IMF itself is shooting itself to the foot if it says that, yes, you need to be able to do these things before we give you the next tranche, when they know very well that even raising revenue is a challenge?
The IMF itself is aware, and in our last meeting with them, I pointed out quite clearly to the country representative that the expectations of the IMF itself on basic education, even though they are modest, they are quite impracticable. And I tried to explain to him the dynamics, and I'll explain it here. The dynamics is that you cannot increase investment in basic education without restructuring the free senior high school program. And let me explain why. You see, if you look at the investment budget of the pre-tertiary education sector, that is more or less the budget less compensation or salaries. Okay, if you take out salaries, the remainder is the discretionary budget, which is where investment comes from, goods and services and capital expenditure. If you take the whole kitty for the pre-tertiary sector, this year, free senior high school alone is taking about 96%. Okay, 96% of the discretionary budget. So, given the limitations of resources, how are you going to increase investment in basic education if you don't go beyond the 4% remaining for basic education? And once you increase it, it will reduce the free senior high school one. So with the IMF appreciating in the program that the free senior high school is poorly targeted, but failing to proceed and make a recommendation for targeting suggests to me that the IMF is not interested in improving any educational outcomes. It's actually a token for the vulnerable, and so we are looking outside the IMF program for some of this commitment. But within the context of the IMF program, I don't see any significant improvements that can happen within the context of basic education financing, because secondary education, after receiving 96% of the discretionary tertiary budget, still is struggling for funds. Not to talk about basic education increasing their share of the discretionary budget.
Kofi, before I let you go off the hook, I mean, for those who have always said that, look, listen, there are people who could pay for the, senior high school free education. Couldn't we have looked at the structure that would allow those who can pay? Or basically, if you look elsewhere, is it in the UK or in the US or in Europe? I mean, boarding school is seen as for the high-end people, and so you pay for the boarding. So some have said, let parents pay for the boarding, let government take the tuition and probably the books and all that. Do you agree to that assertion?
Look, the simplest thing I can suggest to you is that if today government is paying about 1,800 cedis per head for the whole year, for the whole semester, two semesters, 1,800 cedis for feeding boarding students, and about 800 cedis for feeding day students for the whole year. Okay, so that's about 600 cedis. That's about 900 cedis, 900 cedis a semester. Okay, now that is an amount which is so low when it comes to how much parents are spending on their awards in junior high schools, even public school students when they were in junior high school. Now, this is the catch. If government asks parents to contribute only half of the cost of feeding, not the entire free senior high school budget, only half, and the feeding is about 70% of the free senior high school fees structure. The government asks parents to pay only half of the cost of feeding, that will save Ghana government 1 billion cedis every year.
Wow, huge.
Yes, 1 billion cedis every year, because it costs government in excess of 2 billion. It will cost government in excess of 2 billion this year to feed all senior high school students. It's about 2.2 billion. So we will save at least 1 billion, and that 1 billion that we can save can immediately eliminate about 1,000 schools under trees. We have about almost 5,000 schools, 5,400 schools that take place under trees every morning. That 1 billion can immediately eliminate at least 1,000 or 1,200 of the schools under trees in just 1 year. So it is a choice it's a choice we have to make. But so far as I'm concerned, I don't see the politicals buying into this, because of the procurement benefits that government feeding our children brings to government.
Very well. Thank you very much, Kofi. So, ladies and gentlemen, at this point, we're going to take your questions on Twitter. And then if you want to make a contribution or you have a question that you want to ask, this is where we allow you to be able to send us a request. And then we'll make you a speaker and allow you to ask your question. Or you still tweet at Norvan Report. Tweet at Norvan Report, and we'll be able to do that. Mr. Kofi Bentil, I know you are still here listening to the conversation. I did indicate that I wanted you to, come in here. We've sent you a request to be a speaker, if you can accept for us, and then maybe also share with us, because you're a lawyer and also a business strategist, what your concerns and your expectations as far as this budget is concerned. So while we wait for Mr. Kofi Bentil, just to remind you that we are live on ABC News GH television. We're live over there, and this has been Norvan Reports and economic governance platform and a Citizens Ghana Twitter space event. It's been one that we've had a town hall meeting, and we've had all these experts explaining to us and giving us a better understanding of the IMF program, the expectations, and all that they need to do. And so let me quickly go and take some of your questions and your contribution. Now, James Maline's right. It is clear that our challenges as a country would defy any economic principle because it is not people from, it doesn't raise people from poverty, but is to enrich the very few. Well, that is what James writes. Richard also writes, until our leaders become passionate about the development and growth of this country, we will forever remain impoverished. And that really is our major challenge as a country. Now, James also writes, government expenditure cut means cutting monies that makes way to finance political activities and the luxury of the political elites. So why do you think there will be any commitment to do so? Clearly, our political class have chosen or chooses riches over good name. That is what James has put there. Richard Asari says, very educative. I kind of wonder if our leaders really know this stuff, or it's just the case that they don't really care about us as a country. That is what you put there. Yes. And then DG has a question. This one is more of a question. He says, why do this government concentrate much on only the senior high schools to the detriment of basic schools? Without good foundation, how do you get the desired results? In fact, something has to be done in the basic school. Well, that was a contribution that he was also making there. So, ladies and gentlemen, in the next few minutes, if you have any question or answer other than that, I will just take 1 minute closing remarks from our guest, because today we've gone beyond, it's almost 9:20 now. So I'll give each of them 1 minute to wrap up for us on this town hall. We've seen that this town hall, if we have to do it, we have to start a bit early, probably at 6 p.m. and then give time. We'll definitely come your way after the mid-year budget review by the finance minister. And then we would see what is in there and discuss it also as well. But Mr. Bento, yes, you are here. So if you can go ahead.
Right. Good evening to everybody, and thank you, Norvan. I mean, this has been quite interesting. I am just forced to look back at 2008, and this is when the MPP started its campaign on free SHS. And for those of you who can remember, Imani was the lone voice that was tasking and asking that they give us better and further particulars on how they were going to fund this. And we, shouted ourselves hoarse, we were vilified and all those things because everybody thought this is a good idea. All these years down the line, this particular discussion is raising a number of the considerations that we were contemplating at that time. I heard one of the speakers say that the way we are running our government is unsustainable financially. The cost of executing this democracy is unreasonably high. People talk about democracy being expensive. I differ. Democracy is not more expensive than dictatorship. It's just that in democracy, there is accounting. So you get to see how much is spent. In a dictatorship, people die. You can't put value on that. Economies are, wrecked, and there is no accounting. So democracies are definitely not cheap, but they are not more expensive than dictatorships. The difference is that in a democracy, there's accounting and transparency. So you see the cost and you can complain about it. So we should never think that democracy is expensive. However, democracy can be made unnecessarily expensive. And if we make it unnecessarily expensive, we'll come to the point where, Prof. Bobkin is talking about when he says that we are spending too much money to execute this democracy. Now, you ask yourself, why are we spending too much money to execute this democracy? And the reason why that is important is that that itself can destroy the democracy. It can wreck the democracy. Okay, so you have Joe and Co talking about how this just cannot go on. All right. And Kofi is just telling you that when you hear people tell you education, free education, and all those things, the trick there is this: everybody likes education. There is an emotional hook there. When you hear health education, infrastructure, certain things go off in your mind, and you want to do everything to see roads and floods stopped and all these things. But that is where the politicians get us. So that is what threw my mind to the 2008 situation. And I'm saying this for the future because you will keep hearing it. Again, Prof. Bokpin said, and I keep referring to this discussion because I think it brings up a lot. Look at Cocoa Board. They're supposed to be helping farmers and helping the cocoa industry. The only people being helped in Cocoa Board are government and government officials and the people working in Cocoa Board. So if you ask me, we should take Cocoa Board out. Now, this is why when politicians make promises and people tell you all kinds of things that immediately sound good, you should question them and push them like we did in 2008. And I'm telling you, we had a lot to deal with in 2008, even up till now, for just challenging and asking that people should execute free SHS differently because the way they were going was going to be, bad and was going to wreck us. Kofi made the poignant point that if we just get sensible about school feeding, and I remember when school feeding came out, again, an emotional point, we said no parent in Ghana has asked for their children to be fed. None, not even the poor people. Okay, and again, we were insulted. But school feeding alone is gutting our treasury, and the only people it is helping are the politicians and their cronies. I am saying all these things because these conversations are useful. But if we don't learn these lessons and take them into the next phase, we will repeat these problems. Then we will crash this democracy and say it is too expensive when indeed it is not expensive. In this next set of political activities we are going to go into towards this election, let us all over here, and there are over 100 people here, start looking for these emotional hooks that they put in these promises that they have not properly calibrated and quantified, and let us start asking them questions and forcing them to answer. Because when you leave them to make the political promises and go away with them, once they come into office, they feel bound to implement them regardless of the cost of our economy. I can make this point here that part of why this economy has crashed is because we allowed political promises to be made without demanding exactly how they will be implemented, and then we allowed the government to go on to do it however they wished. And it ended in reckless borrowing. And today we are facing a situation where, if we are not careful, we can't tell when this economy will recover. So, Norvan, congrats on these conversations. I think we should have more of them, but we should learn the lessons. And I hope that you make a small publication out of what we've discussed this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kofi. Obviously, you are sure that you see all the publications on Norvan Reports, and I've seen other media friends who have also joined this conversation. So I'm sure you would hear it on other platforms as well, or you read it in other newspapers, because this is a very important conversation. Thank you very much, Kofi Bentil. Kofi Bentil, for those of you who do not know, he is the vice president for Imani Ghana. He's also a lawyer and a business strategist, or a strategy consultant, if I put it that way, for you. So if you're a businessman or you are outside Ghana, those of you who are listening to us from outside Ghana, you want to come in, he's there to give you all the advice that you need. So I'm going to come back to you all, my guests, and then what we'll do is that we'll take 1 minute from you each, how you want to close us tonight, what do you think we should look out for. But let me read this tweet from Prince Ejapon. I asked myself, why are all these brilliant minds not in government? Seniors, the youth are looking up to you. Don't allow the political elite to destroy the country for us and the young ones to come. I mean, it looks like Kofi Bentil, other people think that you are the people who should be managing the economy. Now, Citizen Yao, right, in my opinion, to Capping and Alignment Act should be extended, or the Capping and Alignment Act should be extended to some agencies like the EPA, Gapoa Minerals Commission, and other several government agencies that to raise revenue for us. Minerals Commission in 2022 annual report had over 200 million cedis as surplus, and government needs this money. That is what Kofi. So let me start with Mr. Jackson. Mr. Jackson, so you have 1 minute. After you, we will have Ben also come in, and it will be followed by Professor Lord Mensah, and then I'll come to Kofi Asari, and then we'll have Professor Bokpin close us finally. So let's start with you, Mr. Jackson, please. You have 1 minute. If you can unmute yourself, Mr. Jackson. Okay, so if Mr. Jackson is not there, then let me come to you.
I'm here. I was
Okay.
trying to unmute myself.
Okay, go ahead, please, sir.
Listen, for me, I'm the eternal optimist. I still believe that these countries, despite our numerous challenges, we can fix it. But we've got to ask, like, I love what Kofi says, you've got to ask the hard questions. You've got to take the finance minister to task over his budget. And we have to continue believing that we'll fix this country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we come to you, Ben.
Yeah, no, and I think there isn't much to say again. I think I will agree that the governance is the problem again. And we have to perhaps go granular and seek to, address the specifics from institutional agency level and make sure we're able to track how the change happens. Otherwise, we would run this IMF program for the next 2 years to realize that we are still in the same place. And we'll just keep adjusting the taxes, the levies, and the rest of it. And the change will not happen. So we need to really pay attention. Criticizing, analyzing is part of support to government, even if the government will not see it that way. And we have to be deliberate about how we analyze every sector, every agency, bring all of them on board, ensure that there is that efficiency to deliver us from the situation. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Mensah.
Yeah, thank you, Norvan. Yes, so I'll still be on the monetary policy situation, and I can say that until government reduce, the short-term borrowing, there's no way we can reap the benefit of the debt exchange, that we did. Going into the debt exchange, I was, looking at two benefits. One, to reduce interest burden on the government, balance sheet, and then also to bring interest rate down. But as we speak now, the short-term interest rate is still on the high side, compared to the long term. So if government does not reduce borrowing and the short term, the benefit of, bringing interest rate down will not be realized, as expected through the DDEP. So that is all I have to say. And they can only do that through, fiscal discipline. And so monetary policy in itself alone cannot run, and bring interest rate down. We expect that it goes hand in hand with, fiscal policy, which has to do with government spending control. Thank you.
All right, so Kofi Asari, let's take you, and then we will take Professor Bopin after you. Kofi Asari, if you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I think that government has another opportunity to atone for the 40% cut it inflicted on the basic education budget when it was actually increasing secondary education budget by 30% in the 2023 budget. And the opportunity is what the media budget presents. And so we want to see not only the cuts being restored, I want to see a fully funded basic education budget. And we want to see government beyond that announcing, most importantly, plans to ensure that disbursement aligns with allocation. And then I want to urge all of us to keep talking. The only things politicians are afraid of is when we talk. People think that when we talk, we waste our time. No. The only thing they don't like is when we talk. Because someone kept dollars in their room. No one went on demonstration. No one went to the person's house. No one went anywhere. We just spoke on social media. We spoke until the person herself resigned. And so we should never stop talking. Talking is, for me, one of the best things we can do until the system changes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Professor Bopin, you wrap it up nicely for us tonight.
All right, thank you very much. I want to lean also on what Ben Boache said. The problem is largely governance. The solution cannot be purely financial, economic, as we see it in the program. And Norvan, I'll give you an example as I conclude. Since 1992, Ghana has had a number of IMF-supported programs. since 1992, but actually under the Fourth Republic. If you examine all those programs, IMF supported programs we've had, the 90s, early 2000. In fact, between 2009, 2012, we were under an IMF program. HIPIC, multilateral debt relief, all of that. If you examine, and we've done that, they are heavily financial and economic. When even way back, the problem has been largely governance. So you see that whilst we try to tighten the financial and economic side, you will see that since 1992, the size of government has been increasing at increasing rate. Size of government across central ministries, department, agencies, state-owned enterprises. So you just you document it, right, and count it, look at the cost. You see that gradually that kept expanding because the focus hasn't been on governance reforms. We have not been able to let politicians pay a higher price for the mess they create. And therefore, you see clamoring for political financiers supporting political parties. So today, political parties are more sustainable than the state. Okay, because we have allowed them to be able to tweak the governance to suit their lifestyle and all of that. Okay, so if we don't, we've done enough for the financial, economic, and all of that. I support that in the IMF supported program, and the limited structural reforms. I support that. But I think what we need to do now is to focus more on governance reforms, and we cannot wait. We have to bundle them together. So we cannot wait for the IMF program to run before we come and start governance reforms. And we cannot also wait till next year's election. It will be too late. We have to bundle them together now. So the focus has to be the governance reform, and we have to be able to document the impact and all of that so that we can make a strong case. And that reform, we cannot expect the IMF to deliver that from us because the legal framework may not allow that. We have to write a contract for the people we employ through the political process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Godfred Bokpin. We are so grateful for your time tonight. A big thank you to Mr. Joe Jackson. A big thank you to you, Kofi Asare. A big thank you to you, Kofi Bento. A big thank you to you, Benjamin Boache of ASAP, Professor Lord Mensah, and then Dr. Alex Ampabe. We are grateful for you for your time, and I want to thank all of you who have listened to today's program. We are so grateful to all of you, and let me say that I'm very proud of you that you managed to stay on for another extra hour. Ordinarily, we would have ended our Twitter space around 8:30 or 8:40 thereabout. But because it's a town hall meeting, you bared with us and you have stayed with us up to this time. A big thank you to you. And we are sure that we've all made notes. And one of the key things that our guest told us tonight is that let us talk about the issues. Let's pick only the issues and deal with it, prefer solutions to it, and let us stay away from the politics of insult. It will not help us, but it should be a politics where you talk about the economy, the governance issues. We are made to understand that tonight, the biggest challenge of our country is the governance cost, and we need to be able to deal with these things. Because I remember, Richard Asari tweeted an interesting one. He asked a question. He said, and you actually think that those in government are not brilliant? I beg to differ. It is just pure greed that makes them do the kind of things that they do. Because, of course, most of them came from the Harvard, the MIT, the Oxfords. And those are the universities they attended. And they have colleagues from all those places. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to say a big thank you to you. And a big thank you to ABC News GH. It will be repeated tomorrow evening as well. And I think somewhere within the midweek, the whole program will be repeated on television at ABC News GH. We're live over there and live on all their social media handles. And it has been the Norvan Reports Economic Governance Platform and also Citizens Ghana Twitter Space event, a town hall meeting that we had with you, looking at what we actually signed up for, the conditions or the considerations, if you want to put it that way, for the 2023 mid-year budget review. My name is Norvan Akwaheford, reminding you again that Norvan Report is a media agency. We bring you a unique data, business, and financial news, providing you very accurate and impartial reporting aspect of all the business news that you can find in Ghana, Africa, and across the world. And we do this from the independent point of view. Please, you can visit our website, which is www.norvanreports.com. And every morning we share what we deem as the top stories in the world of business. If you want to be able to get that from us, you can always DM us at Norvan Reports. Leave your phone number, we'll pick it. Make sure it's a WhatsApp number, and we'll make sure that every morning we'll share with you the top stories as far as the world of business is concerned. And you will get to know what is happening within the economy. Until we meet again in 2 weeks, because we do this every 2 weeks or bi-weekly, you want to put it on. We'll meet again. I want to say a big thank you to all of you for making time for tonight. Stay safe. Have a blessed week ahead. Thank you very much. Our viewers on TV, enjoy your night. Those of us on Twitter, enjoy your night. We're sure that you have taken away some few things to help move away. Thank you to all of you. Have a good night.